hearing about the lives of such outstanding evangelists, God changes in our hearts and our ministries. And we are about to hear about the life and ministry of another outstanding evangelist, Francis Schaeffer, as you have heard. And he was one of the most influential evangelists in the way he combined apologetics and evangelism. And so many from IFES and FEUER are influenced by him. So that it is very important to talk about him tonight. And I want to invite Stefan Gustavsson to share with us about his life. And Stefan is director of Apologia, the Center for Christian Apologetics in Sweden. He has a long story with IFES, and he travels widely with apologetic teaching and training. And we are so honored to have Stefan with us tonight to share about Francis Schaeffer. And let me ask you, before you're about to share, has Francis personally influenced you? How he has personally influenced you?
Yeah, he has influenced me very much, and I will soon tell you a story about that. Thank you very much. So when I was 16 years old, I stumbled over Francis Schaeffer in a very surprising way. And the background was this. I grew up in a warm Christian family. We prayed together, we studied God's word. My father was a lay preacher, so in the weekends, the family traveled with him and listened to Bible studies and sermons. And I naturally came to faith as a child. But I grew up in the very south of Sweden, in the south of Sweden, which is a very secular part of Sweden. And I didn't know any other Christians in the area where I lived. We were part of a Christian fellowship there. I had some friends, but in the neighborhood where we lived, and the school and so on, I didn't know any other Christians. And I was really struggling when I became a little bit more aware of the world and thinking, what an odd family I've come to. What on earth is this that is so important for us, but that other people seem to either ignore or to mock? And when as a teenager, I was struggling with those issues in terms of how can I, now when I become more of an adult, really affirm what I have with me from my childhood. When I was 16 years old, I went on a high school conference. The last day they sold out the books from the book table. There was one book that had a very intriguing title and a very low price. So I bought it. And I took the book from that conference to our summer house. And for the rest of the summer, I was supposed to work in that area. Next morning, I woke up sick. And I was sick the whole summer. In the summer house with no television, no books except Bible and some old devotionals. No internet. Just one new book. And that was The God Who Is There by Francis Schaeffer. Swedish translation. So I had nothing to do for a month except trying to get through this book. For the first 100 pages, I didn't understand much. I understood, because that's an overview of Western history, I understood that this man thinks that it is our culture that got irrational and that it is Christianity that actually makes sense. And then from page 101 in the Swedish edition, it's a really powerful argumentation for the truth of the Christian faith. And that summer was so important for me in order to be able to embrace the Christian faith on a deeper level. And since that point, the writing and the thinking of Francis Schaeffer has followed me very closely. I never met him. He died in 1984. I came in contact with the work of Labrie in 1983, and then he was already sick and on a treatment for cancer in the US. In order to understand Schaeffer, we should, of course, or it's absolutely necessary to understand the whole concept of Labrie and his wife Edith. But since my task this evening is what can we learn from Francis Schaeffer, I will leave that out. But Edith was so important for the community, the work at Labrie. She was a woman of great passion. She was a prayer warrior. She was a wonderful, generous and warm person. And I've actually met Edith twice. But if you want to hear about Francis as a person, you need to talk to Lindsay or Anne or other who actually knew the man. I know Francis Schaeffer's work. Most people would agree that the two greatest apologists of the 20th century were C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. And it's very unlikely that these two men should be put together because they were so different. C.S. Lewis was an Oxford and Cambridge academic, a literary professor, world famous for his stories. And of course, his writings are a goldmine of insights and beautiful written texts. And there's so much to get from C.S. Lewis. Francis Schaeffer, he was an American evangelist with a fundamentalistic background, living in a small village in Switzerland and suffering from dyslexia. So in terms of background and positions, they couldn't be more different. But they are the two most influential Christian apologists from the 20th century. How come? That Lewis was influential is natural because of who he was and what he did and his position and so on. What about Schaeffer? Greg Pritchard, director of European Leadership Forum, who also knew Schaeffer personally, he has said this: I would suggest that the leader's personal influence on other leaders, while less understood or appreciated historically, can actually be an equally powerful legacy as having a position, a title, a famous place like Oxford. And here's one of the secrets with Schaeffer, that he influenced individuals in a deep and profound way. And he worked with people who became leaders later on. And they were deeply changed by Schaeffer and by Labrie. What can we learn from Schaeffer? A lot of things. I've selected a few. He was a prophet, I would say, not in the charismatic sense, but a prophet in terms of making time transparent, helping people to see what's actually happening in what seems to be happening. He connected a dot in a very chaotic world so you can start to understand what on earth is going on. Why is this happening? And he had a unique ability to synthesize very complex material and make a kind of clarity. And he did it by looking backwards historically. He saw in our time this strange phenomena that we take knowledge about nature seriously, but as soon as we start to talk about God or beauty or goodness or morality, good and evil, it becomes relative, subjective. We have no basis for that any longer. Where does this split begin? Why have we separated the world like this? And he traces that historically. So he was tracing the roots for the denial of truth and meaning and beauty we see in the Western world. And he was very clear that he predicted, again, not in the charismatic sense, but saying if we will continue to take those ideas seriously that we entertain today, that we deny truth, things will happen. Dramatic things will happen. I recently saw on the internet a TV show from, I think it was from the late 70s. And it was an interview with Schaeffer. And the title of the interview was From Humanism to Chaos to Totalitarianism. That is prophetic. We left Christianity and we thought humanism would be the solution. And Schaeffer said, if you put man at the center, that will lead to chaos. And chaos in turn will lead to totalitarianism. So what do we see around us today? We see humanism being kind of dissolved, chaos is spreading, and now totalitarian voices are coming up. So he saw through the time and situation he were living in and could put together the dots. That is our calling today. We need to learn more about that, how we can connect the dots and understand the time we are a part of. I had the possibility in the late 80s or in the midst of the 80s to go to Swiss L'Abri, to experience L'Abri. And one of the things that struck me was this. Everyone visiting L'Abri were listening to lectures in those old tape recorders and very cheap headphones. And there was one word that reoccurred all the time. I could hear it in my own headphones and in all the others. There was one word that seldom was used in the preaching back in Sweden. And it was not a typically biblical word as such. And the word that constantly was coming back was the word reality. We speak about reality. Christianity is about reality. So the Christian faith was not related only internal to the biblical message. So this part of the Christian faith, where can you anchor that in the Bible, in which book, in which text? So it was not related internally to the Bible or to a certain theological system, where in our systematic theology do we put this? But it was related to the common reality that all people share. And that was really, for me, revolutionary, to really see that. Not that that had been denied before, but the emphasis that Christianity, that is about the truth of the universe. And therefore you can start to think about every aspect of this universe out from a Christian perspective. Schaeffer coined a number of phrases that has, for many of us, stuck in the memory because they capture something really important. They are not sound bites in terms of just kind of fancy rhetoric. They capture something really important, and you can explore what the phrase means. So one of the odd but really important phrases is true truth. Schaeffer realized that people continues to use the word truth, but they meant my truth, how I see it. Truth became a relative word. So it did not have its original meaning any longer. And he again and again claimed that Christianity claims to be true truth, objective truth. Truth that is independent of if I believe it or not, if I feel it or not, if I like it or not. It is the truth about reality, about the objective world that I'm part of. And that means that the truth carries with it some kind of confrontation. Don't think of that in terms of personal aggression, not at all. But if there is true truth, it means there will be a line to be drawn and other things is then false. So you cannot just accept or affirm anything. If there is truth, then I need to be challenged and you need to be challenged. We need to be confronted with what is the actual reality. this challenge of talking about truth has, of course, just increased since the days of Schaeffer. He saw, you can say, the beginning of what we today call postmodernism, and he engaged a lot in existentialism. And what we have around us today, in many ways, is a kind of upgraded version of existentialism. And it's equally important for us to see through this and engage people on the issue of truth. Schaeffer connected a dot historically, and you can say he was a generalist in many areas. He was not a specialist, he was not an academic, he was a generalist that covered a lot of areas. And that is actually something really important. We need all the specialists who have the deep knowledge in a specific area, and it's really good we have so many academics that are going deep in a specific area. But we also need the generalists who can take this big overview. You can think of a map. That is a generalization of reality. We don't have a map which is one-to-one to reality. They are very complicated to fold. So a map is a generalization. If you go to London and you're there for the first time and you pop up from the underground and it's just chaotic of the impressions, then you need a map. And that is a generalization that has taken away millions of things that are actually there in reality, and it gives you the structure of the city, the big picture. And then you can fill in all the details, but you need this overview. In the chaotic world we are in today, I think there is a huge need for, of course, specialists, but also for generalists who can help us and help people to have this overview, this map of reality. And Schaeffer was really, really excellent in this. One of the things that I found so helpful in my thinking that comes from Schaeffer was that he said, look, there are so many philosophies, so many religions, so many different perspectives. But if you look at the really foundational issues, there's not many persons left in the room. Actually, we only have two options. Everything in this world has either an impersonal beginning or a personal. There is no third option. What should that be? Something is either impersonal, like this stand, or it's a person, like you and me. Someone that thinks and has a will. And all philosophies and religions in the world goes back to one of these two starting points. If you take the impersonal alternative, there's two basic versions of that. Western naturalism that says it's nature that is the original starting point, and nature is, of course, impersonal. Matter and energy does not think, does not love, has no will, it just is. It's impersonal. And you have the Eastern pantheism that says, no, it's not nature, it's a spiritual reality, but it's impersonal, it's Brahman. It does not think or love, it's an impersonal reality. If you start with naturalism, with nature, then you have to say there's no meaning to our existence. If you start with the Eastern pantheism, it has a very, very different feel, but actually there is no meaning there either. There is a spiritual reality, but it's impersonal, and therefore you cannot relate to that as a person. You can learn a technique, but basically you learn silence in order to just meld together with this impersonal spiritual reality. The contrast is that everything can have a personal starting point, and that is the Judeo-Christian theism, a personal creator God who has been there in all eternity, who has created this world. And then you have a person to relate to. Then you have meaning in this universe. And if there is a personal God, there can be a revelation, someone who speaks. It's not silence, but there is someone who speaks. And then you can fill in the map, of course. And you have a number of versions under Western naturalism. You have a number of versions under Eastern pantheism, all the great religions of Hinduism and Buddhism and New Age and so on. And Judeo-Christian theism, you have, of course, the Old Testament, you have Judaism that comes out from that, Christianity, and you have Islam with its basic inspiration in one sense from the Judeo-Christian tradition, but then who has changed it and denied, of course, so many things in the Judeo-Christian faith. Okay, this is just a highlighting of how you can mapping reality. And for me, it's been really, really helpful to have this overview. And then, of course, you need to be prepared to fill in all the details and learn about all the different variations. But as far as I have experienced, philosophies and religions actually fit into this basic pattern. And it's really helpful to have this as a tool to understand. In terms of arguments for a personal beginning, we have today, if you follow apologetics, we have so many really good arguments for the existence of God. And there has come many, many good arguments from both philosophy and from science in terms of cosmological arguments or design arguments and so on. They are really helpful. But they are also quite technical. And if you start to discuss those things, very soon you need a lot of deep knowledge of science and philosophy. Schaeffer is very helpful because he does not underline those technical arguments. His basic arguments is, in his phrases, the universe and its form and the mannishness of man. So he takes the broad view of the universe and says, look at this universe. The form it has, the existence that it exists, and its form, and look at yourself as a human being and what is separate you from everything else in this creation. And he uses that as argument for a personal creator. And those arguments can be thought out without a deep technical knowledge of physics or chemistry or cosmology. And that makes those arguments very valid. He has an illustration, I think actually he's stolen it from C.S. Lewis, but Schaeffer is the one who elaborated it. He says, if you take the universe and its form and the human being, you can liken that with a book that someone has cut in two pieces. So every page is cut in the middle. And you've lost one part. So you have a book where there is just a half sentence on every page. That is the reality we now live in. We don't have out from ourselves the answer to what kind of reality this is. And the Bible, if you find the Bible, it's like the other half. It fits with reality. And suddenly you can read the book. The sentences start to make sense if you combine reality with the Bible. It's actually a similar argument as J.K. Chesterton has. He talks about many in his generation, intellectual, that return to the Christian faith, and he says, it ought, I say, to be plainly stated that a number of us have returned to this belief, the Christian belief, and that we have returned to it not because of this argument or that argument, but because the theory, that is the Christian faith, when it is adopted, works out everywhere, because the coat, when it is tried on, fits in every crease. So that's another picture. instead of a book where the two pieces fits together, it's the body and the coat. If you try on other coats, you will have problem. If you try to wrap your life with this impersonal coat, it will not solve life's dilemma. And Schaeffer often used the image of taking off the roof. That's an expression that he became known for. And his thinking was this: people do not think logically about what their actual beliefs means. And they have put a roof over their head, so the painful consequences of their rejection of God does not reach them. So they live under this roof, thinking I can reject God, but I can still affirm love and goodness and beauty and hopefully find some meaning. And Schaeffer said, here we need to have the courage to take off the roof and show the painful consequences that are there if there is no God. If it's actually true that everything comes from the impersonal, which of course undermines the whole human existence if that would be true. And he puts quite a lot of time, and he did in his personal conversations, to remove the roof. And he said, that is painful. It's almost dangerous to help people to see the horrible consequences that follows from a worldview that has no personal beginning. Another way to talking about this is a word that reoccurs in maybe his most sophisticated work. He's there and it's not silent. The chapters, the different chapters all have the word necessity in it. The metaphysical necessity, the moral necessity, the epistemological necessity. The point of that is not to say that Christianity is necessarily, in a logical sense, true. That is not the point. What he's showing is the logical necessity. If you start with that affirmation and draw the logical conclusion with necessity, you will end up here. And to put it in another way, we are not allowed to intellectual cheating, saying there is no God, but I believe in human value, in the worth of human beings. There's no God, but I believe in human dignity. No, if there is no God, man is a piece, human beings is a piece of energy and matter. We are an animal. There's no foundation for human dignity. You cannot come from energy and matter to human dignity. You cannot come from energy and matter to goodness and a distinction between good and evil. There is a logical necessity between your starting point and where you end up. And if you can accept that end result, then you need to go back to the starting point and change starting point so you can have the result that you realize we really need to have. Because in reality, it's impossible for human beings to deny the existence of good and evil. It's impossible. So he draws the logical conclusion of an impersonal beginning and shows the dark choice you then have to do between saying, okay, there is no meaning, there is no human dignity, nihilism, like Nietzsche, is then true, or you have to say, I don't care about thinking. I crucify rationality, and you become an existentialist like Sartre, that you continue to claim things, but they have no foundation in your own worldview. And he invites people to a better perspective. Here I think we need to challenge our culture, challenge students and others to start to think out logically. If you say that, What is the conclusion? What follows from that? Unfortunately, people are not at all used to do that. But that is not a reason for us to avoid it. Instead, we need to train people to think logically. One way to illustrate what Schaeffer is trying to do is to take a painter, an artist, and if an artist have a palette with just one color, black, and you have the canvas is white, then regardless of how gifted the artist is and how long time he has to produce an artwork, it can never be filled with color. There is a limitation in the starting point of the artwork in that the color is black. So you can have black and gray and white, but you can never have the full colors if the starting point is just one color. The naturalists around us are saying the starting point is matter. Okay, then you're limited to the possibilities within matter. The other alternative is a personal God, which is a much, much richer starting point, like a palette with all different colors of love and goodness and creativity and beauty. And from that starting point, a totally different world can be real. The attitude Schaeffer had to this, to how to approach the Christian faith, was an attitude that often was formulated as we need to give honest answer to honest questions. So we need to open up for people to explore, to ask questions, to voice doubts. It's natural, and it's important that we can give honest answers to honest questions. If Christianity relates to truth, we can expect answers. Not answers to every question or exhaustive answers, but we can still expect answers. Another catchphrase that Schaeffer often used is there are good and sufficient reasons for the Christian faith. What does that entail? He says there are reasons, they are good reasons, and there are sufficient reasons. It's not the kind that they are compulsory in the sense that every intellectual person that look into the reason are forced to say yes and come to and start to believe. No, there are no such reasons for anything for a limited human being. But they are sufficient. They are good reasons, and they are sufficient, if you investigate them, for you to have a reason to bow before God. That again, I think we need to learn how to navigate between what's called fideism, that you say there are no arguments at all, just believe, blind faith, and people who demands kind of absolute, definitive proofs, because there are no such things. But if you can give good and sufficient reasons, that is really powerful. Yeah, I think my time is going here. Let me give you a few quotes to end with. Here is a quote from Francis Schaeffer that I often have used. It's written decades ago, but it's Francis Schaeffer's way of explaining what does it mean to become a Christian. And he says, to become a Christian, a human being needs to bow twice. You cannot become a Christian if you do not bow twice. And here is the way he formulated it. A man or a woman is faced with God's promises. Christian faith means bowing twice. First, he needs to bow in the realm of being, that is metaphysically. That is to acknowledge that he is a creature before the infinite personal creator who is there. Second, he needs to bow in the realm of morals. That is to acknowledge that he has sinned and therefore that he has true guilt before the God who is there. If he has true moral guilt before an infinite God, he has the problem that he, as finite, has no way to remove such a guilt. Thus, what he needs is a non-humanist solution. And now he's faced with God's propositional promise: believe on the Lord Jesus and thou shalt be saved. I think this is even more important today than it was in Schaeffer's time, that to become a Christian is to bow twice. We are humanists, we're putting ourselves at the center. If you want to be a Christian, you must bow metaphysically. That is to acknowledge, I'm not at the center of the universe. You bow before the God who has created you, who is upholding your life in every second, that you are totally dependent upon. You need to abandon your humanism and acknowledge God as God. And secondly, you need to bow as a sinner, acknowledge your problem and that you yourself cannot solve your problem before God. And then that is, of course, where the gospel comes in. Schaeffer is known as an apologist, but for him, to bow twice meant that from that point on, you were called to what he called true spirituality, and he defined it like this. The Christian life is a moment-by-moment dependence on God. It's an internal reality, not an external gesture. True sanctification is marked by active passivity, by opening our hands in faith for God to use us as vehicles for his purpose. So by becoming a Christian, we are then called moment by moment to live open before God and being dependent upon God, and open our lives, open our hands, and say, God, use me. And there are many, many stories of how Schaeffer listened to the prompting of the Holy Spirit in what he should do, which person to talk to. So he practiced this moment-by-moment dependence on God. I think that is really crucial for us as evangelists and apologists in our time. Lastly, in his last book, The Great Evangelical Disaster, Schaeffer defines his own ministry like this. Throughout all of my work, there is a common unifying theme, which I would define as the Lordship of Christ in the totality of life. If Christ is indeed Lord, he must be Lord of all of life. So he saw the totality of life under the Lordship of Christ, and he lived in that perspective. In that perspective, you look at every human being as created in the image of God and therefore valuable and important. And one of the most striking things people tell about Schaeffer, those who have met him, was his ability to see and listen to the individual and really take a person seriously, regardless of if it was an intellectual like Schaeffer himself, or a person coming from a very, very different walk of life. He had a heart for people, and he listened to people before he answered their questions. And that is one of the greatest lessons we as apologists have from Francis Schaeffer. Thank you.
Sometimes after a very rich dinner, you just want to sit and meditate. And tonight I felt like it was a very rich food provided for us, being laid on the table for us. And so please let us use opportunity of these days and days to come in order to meditate on the lessons that we just heard of these two outstanding evangelists. And please share with each other about things that encourage you or things that challenged you tonight over the drink, or tomorrow over the meal, or during the walk along beautiful beach. Unfortunately, the time of our evening program is over. So now it's time for us to rest and recharge our minds for tomorrow, for more amazing spiritual food. And please don't forget to grab books by George FEUER. Michael taught me 3 times how to pronounce his surname, and it never worked. And by Francis Schaeffer. Good night.